Welcome back to our deep dive into Exodus chapters 19 and 20, and particularly the 10 Commandments, where today we're going to pick up the pace a little bit. When Jesus was asked to sum up the entire Old Testament law, he did so by quoting two commands, which boil down to number 1, love God, number 2, love your neighbour. Unsurprisingly, those two also neatly sum up the 10 Commandments. The first 4 commandments are primarily Godward in their orientation. They show us how to love God by rightly honouring Him in our living. And then the final 6 commandments are primarily about loving our neighbour. They provide protections for our neighbour. They are like a fence that says, go no further. But as we've seen already, Jesus would have us do more than avoid running into the fences that have been erected to protect our fellow human beings from our sin. Instead, he calls us to actively love them, to proactively love them. These last 3 commandments, 8, 9 and 10, show us some of the dimensions of this love. So commandment number 8 is, you shall not steal. All good, no arguments there, but why not steal? The Christian will answer, because of the intrinsic worth of the other person from whom we might be tempted to steal. Because that person is made in the image of God of great value simply because of their personhood, and of equal value with all others when standing before the Creator and Judge of all. So this most basic respect for the value of all people is overthrown when a despotic ruler takes the property of their subjects by force. Why does the ruler think that they can do it? Because the ruler's power, importance and status trumps that of their subjects. Their life is of greater value, and so they claim the right to take up whatever property they wish. For the lovers of Australian culture, the premise of the classic movie The Castle is that in Australia at least, every family's home is their castle. Every person stands equal before the law, and the value of each is the same. Even the government, with that expression of the collective will, does not have the right to claim property unjustly. For what ultimately is stealing? It is to deprive another of what is properly theirs. Therefore, theft includes the denial of rights and statutory privileges, the underpayment of employees, unlicensed use of intellectual property, fraud of all types, deception for personal benefit, hacking computer software or digital rights, all the way to stealing from the company for which we work, whether we steal stock or we steal our own time. So what does the Christian bring to all of these situations, particularly applying Jesus' primary principle of love for our neighbour? According to the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 4, the opposite of theft is generosity. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. So instead of stealing, the Christian is to work for an honest income, contributing something useful to society, with the goal of generosity to the poor, that they might have something to share with those in need. In an economy where our care for those in need is legislated through our taxation system, tax fraud and tax avoidance could well be viewed as theft from the needy, depriving them of the support that is rightly theirs under our laws. It's tempting to list as many subtle ways in which we might steal in our contemporary world, but I think really the key question is this one: do we steal? And if so, well, we must steal no longer. Instead, we work for the things that we want to possess, contributing something useful to our community, as well as providing for those in need, whether through our own personal generosity or just through our taxation system. This is the appropriate expression of love for our neighbour. Another way of loving our neighbour is by speaking truthfully in testimony. So the 9th commandment is, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. That expression, give false testimony, has a legal setting. So we could say that this is a commandment not simply about telling the truth in general, but it's about telling the truth in the place where it counts the most, in a court of law, where lying can cost the most. Most certainly this is a prohibition of perjury because of the worth of the other person, made in the image of God and valuable in his sight, such that he would send his Son for them. We say only that which is true. Now, to give some context to the importance of truthful testimony, it's worth noting that the way in which other laws outside the Ten Commandments actually expand upon this ninth commandment. So in Deuteronomy 19 we see, one witness is not enough to convict anyone accused of any crime or offence they may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse someone of a crime, the 2 people involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judges must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite, then do to the false witness as that witness intended to do to the other party. Show no pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Notice, by the way, that the context for that famous eye for an eye dictum is actually a call for proportionality in punishing false testimony in a court of law. Perjury, or knowingly giving a false testimony, it's a serious thing with consequences proportional to the wrong to be inflicted upon the innocent one. So for the Christian person, we won't be surprised that Jesus attached the same seriousness to all speech. We turn again to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And to be sure, the call for honesty in personal dealings wasn't invented by Jesus. His call here simply reminds us that there is only one standard, regardless of the context. We tell the truth. There are no grades of truthfulness. To be sure, there's a million ethical conundrums and fabricated thorny dilemmas with which we can entertain ourselves, but Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Why? Because that's how we love our neighbour. It's the same principle that drives these final 6 commandments and of course drives the last of the 10 commandments. So again from Exodus 20, you shall not covet your neighbour's house, you shall not covet your neighbour's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. Now, we very rarely advertise or even confess our own covetousness. It's pretty much a hidden sin. So how is it that it breaches this principle of loving our neighbour? Well, although covetousness is a deeply internal appetite, the passion to possess that which is not rightly ours, that has a deeply social dimension. You see, this same passion to possess, it's very often paired with a deep resentment of the flourishing of someone else. It's not just that we want what they've got, but that we think we deserve it more than they do. And so covetousness is the root of many other evils. Jealousy, rage, and that delicious German word, Schadenfreude. Forgive me if I've mispronounced it, but it's the perverse delight we take in the unfortunate crash of a very expensive car, the pleasure derived from another person's misfortune. Great German word. In its full-blown form, this covetousness is expressed in what is colloquially termed death riding, anticipating and even seeking the demise of another person. In other words, it's the antithesis of love. Love for our neighbour delights in their good, even in their good luck. In the face of covetousness, celebrating and rejoicing with those who rejoice is good for our souls. Instead of believing the lie that somehow having what they've got will actually satisfy us in a lasting way, well, we learn to find instead that our satisfaction is in God Himself, not in our neighbour's stuff. Knowing God's ways, trusting His mercy, relying on His provision, let them be enough for us for now. Ultimately, it is the giver of good gifts who is the satisfaction of our souls and not the gifts themselves. And so as we continue our growing disciples journey, tomorrow, moving on from our deep dive into the Ten Commandments, you may be pleased to hear, I want to pray that we will indeed grow in this sense of personal satisfaction in God, who is the giver of all good gifts.